Summer was ending in New England, and the warm days in combination with the cool nights were having its effects. The leaves were beginning to change to their autumn colors. It was Friday afternoon, and the masses were getting out of work and starting their commute home. Stuart Miller was a systems analyst for a local tool company. In his early 40s, he had never been married or even came close to having a long-term relationship with a woman. At 6 feet 1 inch and a bit on the heavy side, he could best be described as your typical nerd. After a long, tough week at work, Stu looked forward to a couple of days alone with his PC. He was making his way out of the office building and across the parking lot to his car. Just as he reached it, he heard a few angry cries several rows down. He looked over and spotted Barbara trying to punch out her car. Barbara Connors was his department's administrative aide. She was in her late 40s, 5 feet 4 inches with average looks and short, dirty blonde hair. Stu walked over to her to get a closer look at what was going on. She had locked her keys in the car and was trying to get in somehow. She had tried every door and window, but could not gain entry and reduced herself to kicking the tires and screaming at the automobile. Stu was a little hesitant to approach her. Since he had known her, she never smiled and always looked a bit depressed. He always thought that was because she wasn't married and she felt frustrated about it. "Hey, Barb. What's wrong?" He finally spoke up. "I locked my damn keys in the car, that's what's wrong. Do you think you can open it up for me?" "I don't know. I'll try." Stu tried all the doors and windows just like Barbara had done. He even tried to squeeze his pen in between the window and the frame, but he too was unsuccessful in getting in. When he gave up, he turned to her and saw the desperate look on her face. When she said that she only lived 15 minutes away, he decided to offer her a ride home where she had a spare set of keys. The ride to Barbara's house was quiet and a little awkward. The only conversation was that of Barbara calling out directions to Stu. Even though they had worked together for over 2 years, they really didn't have much in common. Barbara's 3-bedroom house was in a quiet residential neighborhood on a street which had been developed 30 years earlier. Not at all like Stu's condo and not what he expected Barbara to live in. But then again, he didn't pay close attention to much of anything outside his work environment. Once inside, Stu remained in the living room while Barbara went into her bedroom to search for the spare car keys. While waiting, he began to look over the many photographs spread out over the fireplace and on an end table nearby. He recognized Barbara and a man who might have been her husband. There was one photo of a little blonde girl and several pictures of another older girl with brown hair at various ages. Barbara came back in with keys in her hand and saw Stu staring at the photos. She walked up close to the mantel and pointed to one of the photos of the girl with brown hair. "That's my daughter, Shelley. I thought you weren't married." Stu replied a little shocked. "I'm not any longer. I'm a widow. My husband died many years ago in a car accident." Stu looked over at Barbara and saw that she is a little teary-eyed. He came behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, but she moved away from him quickly. "Please, Stu. I'm not interested in getting involved with a younger man." Even though both had no one in their lives for sexual pleasure or even personal comfort, he dropped his hands and began to walk out of the room. Barbara thanked Stu for the ride and offered him a cold drink before they headed back out to the car. He accepted the offer and followed her into the kitchen. He felt that was probably the only offer he would get that night. Standing at the kitchen counter, Barbara began to loosen up a little and talked about herself a bit. She began by explaining that she lived with Shelley, who is getting married at the end of the next month and is a bit depressed about living alone soon. There is a real possibility that she would be selling the house since it would be empty without a family. Barbara went on to say that Shelley is a bit on the wild side but admitted that it was her fault for not disciplining her enough and the lack of a father figure. There had been men in Barbara's life, perhaps too many, but none of them stuck around for a permanent commitment. As Shelley got older and more independent, she was never around to help since she needed to work full-time to support them both. Presently, Shelley was off camping with her fiancé for the weekend. Barbara continued to unload on Stu. "There are so many things to take care of before the wedding and Shelley just runs off leaving me with all the arrangements. I swear sometimes that girl needs to be put in her place. I only hope her husband can handle her better. Barbara then picked up something off the kitchen counter to show Stu. It was a necklace that Shelley bought the other day at a pawn shop. Look at what she spends her money on. Is this the ugliest thing or what? I don't know, it seems all right. Stu replied in a typical male non-committal fashion. She took the necklace and put it over her head and showed him how it looked right on her. You think this looks nice? She asked him. Stu reached out to grab it and moved it closer to get better look. There was a medallion with what looked like an angel or a fairy engraved into it. Just as he gently touched the medallion, he felt really strange. There was a tingling in his groin and his skin felt like it had goosebumps everywhere. He felt a little dizzy and sat down right back at the kitchen table. The first thing that caught his eye was that his watch was banging around on his arm. Looking more closely, his arm was getting thinner and shorter. All the hair was getting lighter and much thinner to the point of disappearing. It felt like the chair, no the table, no the whole room was changing size. Everything was just slightly bigger to him. His clothes started to irritate him. They weren't sitting on his body properly. Mostly they felt too big everywhere. Everywhere except his chest. My God, he thought, I'm growing breasts. Stu was so totally absorbed in himself, he hadn't realized that Barbara was changing too. Sitting in the next chair over, Barbara was experiencing all the same tingles except that it all looked smaller to her. Her clothes were getting so tight in the shoulders and her feet were starting to hurt. She quickly kicked off her heels under the table before it got too painful. She watched her hands get larger as the hair on her arms got thicker and darker. The elastic waistband of her wool gray and pink plaid skirt felt tight as she saw the bulges on her chest get smaller. It got to the point where the cups of her bra felt empty while the straps seemed to cut into her more. Stu and Barbara had each been totally engrossed in their own changes to notice each other. When the tingling started to subside, they looked over at one another and gazed in amazement as they realized that they changed into forms of each other. After 30 minutes had passed, Barbara began to speak. She tried to clear her throat several times as the sound emanating from her mouth came out much deeper than she was used to. Her new voice sounded just like Stu's did. What has happened to us? She asked. I don't know. This is sure weird. Stu responded in a soprano tone. They looked over at each other intensely while subtlety trying to access their own changes. After several minutes, Barbara suspected that the medallion was the cause of everything and asked Stu to touch it again. He reached over and tried to handle it again the way he did before. His hand was now a different shape and his fingernails were longer, but after holding it, there was no change that affected them. Barbara gave the necklace to Stu to put around his neck and she tried to touch it this time. Again, nothing happened. Once more, she said as she grabbed the necklace and returned it to her own neck. But, as they both expected, they remained in the same new forms. Night fell as both Stu and Barbara began to feel very uncomfortable with the clothing they were wearing. Barbara's bra straps were really pinching into her skin, so she was the first to suggest swapping their clothes. She removed her pantyhose, which were now completely stretched out along with her skirt. Stu's shoes and pants practically fell off him as he rose up out of his chair. He unbuttoned his shirt and pulled his t-shirt over his head. Barbara was only too happy to remove her pink V-neck sweater and bra. Neither one wanted to remove their panties or underwear just yet. Stu calmly put on the sweater and skirt. He passed on the bra and pantyhose, preferring to remain in his bare feet. Barbara wore his t-shirt and button-down shirt along with his pants and socks. At that point, with the exception of the hose and bra on the table, the scene in the kitchen looked fairly normal to an outsider. But Stu and Barbara knew better. Neither one felt they could leave now, so Barbara decided to fix themselves some dinner. As Barbara began to move around the kitchen, she realized that she felt a little awkward moving about in her new body. It was so much larger than usual and there was definitely something extra moving between her heavy legs. After dinner, while Barbara cleaned up, they continued to talk about what happened to them. Most of the conversation revolved around their new feelings and emotions, but Barbara talked a lot more than Stu did. She spoke more about Shelley and about the burden that the upcoming wedding had put on them. Financially, she was living now from paycheck to paycheck. All her savings were going toward a very expensive affair for her only daughter. Her biggest fear was selling the house to provide some much-needed income. She really loved her home and didn't like the thought of moving. But after the wedding, she would be alone, and that terrified her the most. Meanwhile, all this time without the support of a bra, the extra weight on his chest started to have an annoying effect on Stu. His breasts were feeling every slight movement of his body against the soft sweater. His large nipples were very sensitive as he kept looking down into the crevice between his breasts, which were exposed by the V-neck style. When he could stand it no more, Stu moved to touch his breasts. They felt so warm and nice that it made him experience a twinge between his legs, something that he never felt before as a man. While Barbara was putting some pots away, she glanced over in Stu's direction and noticed immediately what he was doing to himself. Rather, to her body, which she was intimately familiar with. As she watched him in silence, slowly fondling her former breasts, she felt a stirring between her own legs. Looking down at the bulge in the front of her pants, she realized that she was getting hard. In fact, real hard, and it was a terrific sensation. She reached down to stroke herself, but recognized she would have to open her pants. At that very moment, Stu looked up and gazed into her eyes. He saw the passion in his own reflection. Stu got up and walked over to her, and grabbing the pot from her hand, he laid it down on the counter. "Who's the younger one now?" he asked in jest. They embraced in each other's arms and lost themselves in a long kiss. Barbara suggested they move to the bedroom, where they explored each other into the night. Naked, in bed with the lights off, they each experienced a level of love-making that neither one had ever dreamed of. Being familiar with one's body made the encounter for the other most enjoyable. It was many hours later before they drifted off to sleep. Barbara woke up with a smile on her face and glimpsed over at the alarm clock. It was a little before 8 a.m., but she felt wide awake. It was Saturday, and she thought about how she always slept late on the weekends. Why not this morning? She must have inherited Stu's sleeping patterns. She wondered what else she would pick up now that she was in his male body. Barbara looked over at Stu and saw what she remembered as her former self sleeping soundly. Knowing how cranky she was in the morning, she decided to let him rest and quietly headed toward the bathroom. She took a long, hot shower while she again explored her new framework. There was now a lot more of her to wash, and most of it was hairy. She toyed with the idea of shaving her legs, but something inside told her that it was too weird. After soaping all of her body, she began to pay more attention between her legs. All the rubbing and soaping had made her hard again. Quickly she began to pleasure herself, and thinking that she could get very used to this. After a most enjoyable shower, she looked for something that would fit her larger body. Stu's old clothes were sitting in a pile at the foot of the bed, but they were a bit smelly and needed to be washed. From the back of her closet she pulled out an old bulky sweatshirt which she hadn't worn in years since it was always too large for her. As she pulled it over her head and down her flat, hairy chest, the sweatshirt touched the medallion that she still wore. She immediately felt the same tingling all over her body that occurred the night before. As she stood frozen in the closet doorway, she went through the transformation just like the day before, only this time in reverse. After 30 minutes, she had changed back to her former female body. Barbara looked herself over again and theorized that you must have to wait overnight to change back. She was never one to experiment much, so she never took the time to investigate that the medallion of Zillow only required 12 hours between changes. She perked up thinking about the possibilities of her newfound magical necklace. She ran over to the full-length mirror to check herself out and saw that she was younger than she remembered. She looked about the same age she did the last time she wore that sweatshirt. Her body felt great, energetic, and she even weighed several pounds less. Her hair had a softer texture and a richer color. Feeling excited, she went to get dressed in her bra and panties again. As she adjusted the straps over her shoulders, she noticed less sag than before. Reaching into her closet again, she put on an old pair of black jeans which she remembered as being too tight, but now they fit perfectly. Off a hanger, she pulled out a t-shirt, and from the floor, she took her black shoes with a low heel. Just as she was finishing getting dressed, the phone rang and she ran inside to answer it. Stu was woken up by the ringing of a telephone. He was still a bit groggy from the long night of passion and few hours of sleep. He heard Barbara's voice talking in the distance as he tried to arouse himself. He was quite happy about the night before until he reached down to scratch himself. He opened his eyes, very startled to be missing his vital body parts. He tried to remember all that happened last night as the thoughts of the mysterious changes quickly filtered into his head. Barbara walked into the bedroom and the two looked almost like twins. Stu was startled to see that she had changed back. "How come you're back to normal, but I'm not?" he asked. She explained that she found out how to change herself back and that she was pretty sure she could change him too. "Great," he said. "I want to change back now." "Okay. First take a shower and I'll get things ready." While Stu was in the shower, Barbara cleaned up her room and went about taking care of a few things. Stu finished his shower quickly and came out with just a towel around himself. He decided he needed to cover his breasts now and held his towel higher than he normally would. He met up with Barbara, who had a devilish grin as she put the medallion around his neck and touched something to it. He started to change, but with less tingle than he remembered from the night before. He got taller, but only by a few inches. He felt hair touching his shoulders as it got even longer and turned brown. His breasts had become even larger when the change stopped. In his amazement, he cried out, "Why haven't I changed back? Barb, what did you touch me with?" She revealed a pair of white nylon panties with lace trim. "I need you to do something for me first." She explained the phone call was from the bridal shop and that Shelley's wedding gown was ready for the first fitting. She knew Shelley was away and didn't know when she would be able to make it. Shelley was always flying off on the weekends, so she decided that Stu would go in her place. He was now Barbara's 24-year-old daughter. Stu complained bitterly that he wanted to go home and demanded that Barbara change him back now. She told him that he can't change back till tomorrow morning and he owed it to her after last night. Stu conceded the battle was lost and went looking for his clothes. "All your clothes are in the wash I started while you were in the shower. Besides, they wouldn't fit you now anyway." She pointed to the full outfit laid out on the bed. "These are from Shelley's closet and it's what you're going to wear today." He saw that some of the items still had their original tags on them from the store. These were things that she had bought for Shelley. The two women definitely had different tastes in clothing, and because of this, Shelley had never worn them. Barbara removed the necklace as she handed him the panties and a white bra with large lace cups. She helped him put them on as she removed the tags from the rest of the clothing. He put a ribbed, white knit sleeveless top over his head and smoothed it out over his breasts. She handed him a pair of beige pantyhose. "How do you work these?" he asked, just staring at them. She had him sit on the bed while she gathered them up, one leg at a time, and guided them up his legs and over his panties. Next she handed him what looked like a pair of peach-colored shorts with extra material. He put them on and she showed him how the material pulled around the front and buttoned over his left hip. He walked over to the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door and stared at himself. From the front, it looked like he had a skirt on, but from the rear, they were shorts. "Why can't I wear pants like you are?" he asked. She gave him some explanation that it would be easier to change at the bridal shop. He didn't buy it, but he didn't complain either. She handed him a pair of white flats and told him to put them on and to hurry up. They still had to eat some breakfast and be at the shop before noon. Stu was thankful that she didn't make him wear heels. Barbara was actually considering it, but she figured it would have taken a lot longer to get through the day. She had lots of plans for him and didn't want to have to start with a lesson on walking. After breakfast was cleaned up, Stu went into Shelley's bathroom to brush his teeth. He felt funny at first using someone else's toothbrush, but it seemed somehow like it was his. After finishing up in the bathroom, he met up with Barbara in the kitchen. She looked at him and, grabbing his hand, led him back into her bedroom. She sat him down at her vanity and began to brush his long brown hair. She finished by pulling the hair from each side just above the temples and fastening it around the back with a barrette. The rest of his hair fell at shoulder length. She stuck a pair of pearl earrings in his pierced ears and a single strand of pearls around his neck. Stu, about to get up, was informed that he wasn't finished yet. Barbara turned Stu away from the vanity mirror and began to apply some dark eyeliner and mascara. She continued with some light eyeshadow and then some blush for his cheeks. She finished off by lining his lips with a pencil and then applying lipstick in a strawberry red. She fussed with his hair again and did a little more touch-up on his makeup before she turned him around to let him see the final results. Stu stared at his reflection and tried to find an image of his former male self. Instead, he found that of a beautiful young woman. As he gazed in the mirror and thought of himself to really be Shelley, he got the feeling that Shelley doesn't usually wear makeup or even wear her hair this way. He was about to say something about it to Barbara when he noticed that she wasn't even in the room anymore. "Honey, you look lovely, but we have to get moving now," Barbara said to Stu as she poked her head back into the room. Barbara had grabbed a box and her purse. She had to pull on Stu's arm to get him to move out of the chair. Barbara drove Stu's car to the bridal shop since Stu had no license. In fact, he had nothing with him at all. His skirt had no pockets and Barbara hadn't given him a purse of his own to carry anything. He felt very vulnerable and at the mercy of Barbara for all his needs, and that was just the way she wanted it. On the ride over, Barbara explained the new rules to Stu. "Listen, you're going to have to get used to the name Shelley from now on. That's what everyone is going to call you, and you'll be referred to in the feminine form of her and she. And while we're at it, stop calling me Barbara. It's Mom now, got it?" "Okay, I got it, MOM," Stu replied in a sarcastic tone. As she parked the car, Barbara turned to Stu. "It's scary. Sitting there with your ankles crossed and your little mannerisms, you are my Shelley. Now let's go in there and have some fun." As the two ladies walked in the shop, a woman came from behind the counter to greet them. "Hi Shelley, I'm glad you could make it today." "Hi Sarah, I brought my mom with me this time." "Yes, we spoke on the phone this morning. Come with me, you can change in the back." They all headed to the back of the shop where there was a large fitting area and a small changing room. When they were alone in the changing room, Barbara asked Shelley, "How did you know that woman's name was Sarah?" "I never told you." "I don't know. I can't explain it. I just looked at her and the name came out like I always knew it." Barbara was beginning to think that Stu's mind was slowly becoming more like Shelley's. Things were going better than she planned. Stu removed his shorts and top and headed out to the fitting area in just his bra and panties. Sarah and her assistant arrived from the storage area with the gown and helped him into it. The dress was a beautiful floor-length silk-faced satin gown in ivory. It was sleeveless with a chantilly lace bodice and a full skirt. "Did you bring your shoes with you?" Sarah asked. Stu looked puzzled for a second as Barbara opened the box she had brought with her. She handed the ivory satin pumps with 3-inch heels to him and motioned him to slip them on. Standing on the platform, in front of a wall of mirrors in the corner of the room, Stu was mesmerized by his new reflection. He barely noticed Sarah and her assistant busy with their pins, making the necessary adjustments. "This gown has quite a deep scooped neckline," Sarah commented. "The lace from the cups of your brasserie is showing. You'll need to wear a different kind under this." Barbara agreed and told Sarah that she would take care of it. Sarah asked Shelley how she will wear her hair because she needs to decide on the veil. "You're right," Barbara said. "We'll take care of that too." Stu had a feeling that meant more of his involvement today. He also knew he shouldn't be enjoying this as much as he was. Sarah asked Stu to turn around a few times so she could see how the dress moved and to walk around a bit to get an idea on the length. He was real worried about walking in such high heels, but after a few wobbles, his natural balance took over. Looking over to Barbara, he saw a few tears on her cheeks. He stepped down and walked over to comfort her. Barbara admitted to him that she was so proud of her daughter and secretly wished Stu could stay that way always. She reached into her purse and used a hanky to dry her eyes. After they had left the shop and got back in the car, Stu turned to Barbara. "That was fun, Barb, but I'm glad it's over with. Let's head home. Shelley, remember it's Mom and we're not done yet. In fact, they were just beginning. Next stop was a corset shop where Barbara had him trying on various bras and slips. Stu felt so strange getting felt up by the saleswoman who was measuring him for the proper fit. He felt like he was in the try-on room for hours while Barbara and the saleswoman kept handing him different styles and colors. When Barbara asked about a peignoir set, the woman returned with something lacy and red. This one would look really cute on her, don't you think? The saleswoman asked Barbara while holding it up against Stu. Yes, but for her wedding night, I think she needs it in white. Oh, this is for her wedding? Well then, I some new things that would make her night very special. An hour later, they left the store with several full shopping bags. Mom, I'm really hungry and my feet hurt, complained Stu. All right, let's stop for a quick lunch then. The two went into a small restaurant and ate a light meal. They were engaged in conversation about the day's events and the upcoming wedding. Stu even asked Barbara about the dress she would wear. She said that too much money had been spent by that time and she would wear something she already owned. Looking over at Stu, she gazed at his pose. Both his hands were up behind his head as they played with his hair and adjusted the position of the barrette. Barbara was amazed at these unconscious motions. They were identical to what she had seen Shelley do hundreds of times before. Barbara got up and motioned Stu to join her in the ladies' room. They went into adjoining stalls where Stu was now familiar with undressing and sitting on the toilet. Don't forget to wipe, Barbara called out jokingly. After washing up, Barbara opened her purse and reapplied her lipstick. She took out a second tube and handed it to Stu. You need to touch yourself up too, you know. He was a little nervous doing it himself, but after just a few well-placed strokes across his lips, it felt like he was an old pro at it. Once again in the car, Stu thought his little adventure was over until Barbara pulled into Dawn's salon. This shouldn't take long, honey, she said as they entered. Why don't you wait here? Stu took a seat and looked around at the beauty salon he was in. He took a magazine off the table in front of him. It was Glamour and he was about to put it back to look for a computer magazine instead when some of the photos caught his eye. Could I look like that? He thought as he skimmed through the ads for cosmetics. He was busy reading a feature article on picking the right outfits to wear at the office when Barbara returned. Shelley, you remember Dawn? Pointing to the beautifully made-up woman next to her. Hi, Shelley. I haven't seen you in years. Probably not since you came in to get ready for your senior prom. Come on back with me and we'll see what you want to do with your hair. On the way back to her station, Dawn asked one of her workers to bring over the bride's book. Once Stu sat down again, Dawn started to show him photos of different hairstyles to wear with a veil and asking his opinion. He was a bit nervous about it and kept looking over to Barbara for some guidance. He was very non-committal about the choices and Barbara was no help. She was enjoying seeing him squirm. I'll tell you what, Shelley, Dawn said as she removed his barrette and began to fuss with his hair. While Michelle gives you a complimentary manicure, let's try a few things and see what we like. Okay? Stu never really had a choice. He sat patiently, while Dawn went about trying many styles. A half hour had gone by and Dawn had another appointment. Stu and Barbara each settled on their own favorite style and said they would decide the final one later. He knew that by tomorrow it would be the real Shelley's decision and he would be back to himself. He thanked Dawn and as he rose from the chair, he noticed his nails were glossy and smooth. They were now a light pink, similar to the color of his skirt. Once again in the car, as he kept looking at how pretty his nails were, he didn't notice that they pulled into one of the area's largest shopping malls. Barbara led Stu into the women's clothing section of one of the more upscale department stores. Mom, what are we doing here? Stu asked. What are you wearing to the rehearsal dinner and after the reception? She asked him back, expecting an answer. Stu was dumbfounded. Surely she didn't expect him to respond. Barbara was about to say something when it struck her who she was really talking to. Oh, I'm so sorry, I was so caught up in it all today. Just help me out a little more here and then I'll buy you a nice dinner. She apologized. That little more took them into the evening. Stu had tried on numerous styles of dresses from 3 different stores. Of course, Barbara insisted he buy matching shoes and a few other accessories. Both of them had their arms loaded with packages when they finally departed the mall. They stopped at a nice restaurant. Because it was Saturday night, they had to wait in the bar area until a table was available. While there, they were both hit on many times, but Barbara politely declined all offers for the two of them. Stu could not believe the lines they were using on them. After a couple of drinks, Stu and Barbara were giggling like schoolgirls with each new line they were approached with. It was late by the time they got home. Barbara led Stu into Shelley's room and gave him a pair of flannel pajamas to wear. She helped him remove his makeup and then tucked him into bed. As she sat on the side of the bed, Barbara thanked Stu for the wonderful day they had spent together. He had given her some of the closeness to Shelley that she had been missing for quite a while. "In the morning we'll change you back. Then we can finally retrieve my car from the office lot and you can get back to your life," she said. "You bet. Good night, Mom." "Aw, that's sweet of you. Good night, Shelley." Stu woke up to the high-pitched sound of a woman screaming. He was very groggy and disoriented, but he thought he recognized the voice. He opened his eyes to see someone standing over him. The sight of a person so close had him quickly jump out of bed, where he found himself looking at his own twin. It was early Sunday morning and the neighborhood was very quiet, and it was just after sunrise, so there was a little light in the room. Barbara came running in quickly to see what all the noise was about. "Mom, who is she? What's she doing in my bed? And why does she look just like me?" the real Shelley asked. "Oh honey, I didn't expect you back so early. Let's all go into the living room and I'll tell you all about this," Barbara said, clutching her daughter to comfort her. Barbara introduced Shelley to Stuart and began to explain about the necklace with the medallion and its ability to change people. She went on about the call from the bridal shop and how she had tricked Stu into going. "Yuck!" Shelley exclaimed. "She was wearing my wedding dress?" "No, he was wearing it." "That's gross. Stuart was going to change back to himself this morning before you got home. By the way, why are you home already?" Shelley explained that it started to get cold and rainy, so they packed up early. Shelley, however, still didn't believe her mother's story. It all sounded a little too far-fetched. Barbara went into her bedroom and returned with the medallion. Stu opened up the top few buttons of his pajama top, took the necklace from her and put it over his head. Shelley stared at her twin's image and looked for it to change. "I don't see anything different happening. I told you that you have touched a piece of clothing to it," Barbara explained as she left to go down to the laundry rooms to get Stu's clothes. While she was gone, Shelley grabbed a piece of clothing off the top of a pile sitting next to her. "You mean all you have to do is this?" As she pushed it up against Stu, he began to feel the familiar tingle once again, but it seemed much stronger than last time. "Hey, what did you that for?" he screamed. "I wanted to try it out and see if it was for real." He explained that Barbara had left out the part about there being a time limit involved and now he would have to wait overnight again. Shelley just watched in amazement, not believing her own eyes. Barbara came back in carrying Stu's clothes and noticed Stu was quickly getting smaller. "Oh my God! What happened?" she yelled. Shelley explained to her mother that she wanted to see what would happen for herself. Meanwhile, Stu grabbed the clothes from Barbara and touched them to the necklace, but it had no effect. He still continued to shrink. Stu looked now like a teenager as his hair kept getting lighter. Barbara asked Shelley what she touched him with and she pointed to the pile of clothes. Barbara looked again at Stu and just stared at him with her hand over her mouth. He looked about 10 years old now and the pajama bottoms fell right off his hips and onto the floor at his feet. "What's wrong?" Stu asked, seeing the expression on Barbara's face. His voice was now much higher than a few minutes ago. Both women could only stare as the transformation continued. After about 10 more minutes, the tingling stopped. Stu looked way up to the two women now being just waist high to them. He looked at his skinny arms and tiny hands. The short-sleeved pajama top he was wearing was very loose and practically fell to the floor, looking more like a nightgown. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked in the squeaky, high-pitched voice of a very young girl. Barbara responded with only one word, "Kelly," as she ran out of the room crying. "Oh, my God, Mom. It is Kelly," Shelley said with surprise. "Who's Kelly?" the little girl asked. "She was my little sister. She was with Daddy in the car when they were killed by a drunk driver. But that was a long time ago." Shelley again looked for a long time at the toddler before speaking. "I better go check on Mom," Shelley said when she heard crying coming from the other room. Stu finally went to move too and fell down immediately. He had tripped over the pajama bottoms still gathered at his feet. Long strands of golden blonde hair fell on his face, blocking his sight. Shelley helped him up and held his hand as they walked together toward Barbara's room. Stu noticed that he had to hold his arm almost straight up to reach her. With his other hand, he held up the hem of his pajama top to keep it from dragging on the floor. Once in the room, Shelley sat down on her mother's bed. Barbara explained that she was just starting to empty out some of the closets and preparing to give them away to Goodwill. It was the first step toward selling the house once Shelley was married and moved out. The pile in the living room was from Kelly's closet. Shelley understood that her mother was coming to terms after many years that Kelly was gone. Seeing her back brought all the emotions forward at once. Barbara wiped the tears from her eyes and looked at her little girl standing at the foot of the bed. She got up, walked over to where Kelly was standing and lifted her up in the air and into her arms. "My baby. You're back with me." Stu felt himself close to Barbara's breast and sensed an inner warmth and peace. He was about to ask for assurance that he would be changed back tomorrow, but he realized this probably wasn't a good time. It was still morning and he had the whole day to work on it. When Barbara finally put Stu down, he went to take his first step but lost his balance as his foot was tangled in the oversized pajama top. He fell back on his rear into a sitting position. The two women started to laugh hysterically. "What are you laughing at?" he cried. "You look so cute. Let's get you dressed," Barbara said as she picked Stu up in her arms. She held him at her hip with one hand under his bottom so that Stu's legs straddled her side. He instinctively held one arm around her back for support and together they walked down the hall. The door just beyond the hall bathroom was closed. Stu knew this was a room in the house that he had not seen yet. When the door opened, he saw a room that was definitely decorated for that of a young girl. The walls were a cream color and the matching bedspread and curtains were done in pink lacy ruffles. The small bed was loaded with stuffed animals and the white table and shelves were lined with dolls and toys. There was still an infant's changing table in the room, which is where he was placed. After Barbara picked out some items from the closet and drawers, she removed Stu's top and the medallion, which she put safely in her pocket. Stu was dressed in a t-shirt and white panties with a flower print. Then came a pair of pink corduroy overalls with fuzzy white teddy bears on them. The overalls had snaps going from the bottom of one leg up to his crotch and down the other leg. Barbara reached under the table and placed pink anklets with lace trim and white sneakers with Velcro straps and cartoon characters on his feet. After she finished fastening them, she looked at him and announced, "You're all set. How do you feel?" "Comfortably numb," he replied sarcastically. She helped him down off the table when he turned to her with a question. "Barb, how old am I now?" "Oh God. I don't really know. I would say that you're about 3, maybe even 3.5, but I feel so small. I have to look up to everything and it all looks so much bigger." "Well, at birth you were a preemie and you've always been on the petite side of the scale for your age. Look, I have to get dressed myself. Be a good girl and keep busy for Mommy, okay?" Left alone, Stu looked some more around the room. From his new angle, he couldn't see much. Even the bed would be a real struggle to get into. He found a red stool and carried it over to the bed. He climbed up and sat amongst a sea of stuffed animals. The bed had a protective railing on the side that was open to the room to prevent someone from falling off. He guessed that someone would be him for tonight. At least it wasn't a crib. As he held a bunny in one arm and a monkey in the other, he thought about the events which led up to this morning. He was having a really hard time remembering details of his former life. He spotted a giraffe poster on the back of the door with a height chart on it. He laid down on his stomach and inched himself backwards off the bed till his feet hit the floor. He walked across the room to measure himself. By putting his hand flat on his head, he placed his tiny fingers against the poster. In his sneakers, he was about 34 inches tall. Looking through the drawers at some of the clothes, he discovered that most of them were marked either 24 months or size 2T. Stu felt some mounting pressure between his legs and decided to go to bathroom. After spending the last 2 days as a female, he knew the signs and he knew that he would have to sit down to take care of things. He stood next to the toilet and struggled with the overalls. He couldn't manipulate his fingers well enough to unhook the straps. Shelley appeared in her bathrobe with a towel wrapped around her hair. "My, don't we look cute today? All pretty in pink." She had a very wide grin on her face. "Kelly, do you need to go pee-pee?" She helped him pull his overalls and panties down and picked him up to place him on the toilet. She removed her towel and proceeded to blow dry her hair. She stopped for a minute and took some toilet paper off the roll and handed it to him. "Don't forget to wipe." God, he thought, she sounds just like her mother. Stu was a little nervous with Shelley right there, so it took him a while before he was done. He hopped off and she bent down and helped him get snapped again. "You know, you could just undo the snaps around the legs here, but usually that's just for changing your diaper." A diaper, Stu thought. He hoped that wasn't necessary. He saw a bathroom scale in the corner and walked over to weigh himself. He was only 30 pounds and that was fully dressed. Shelley finished her hair and looked over to Stu. She brushed it out a few strokes and patted him lightly on the head. As she left, he followed her into her room. Shelley hung her robe in the closet and stood naked in front of him. Normally, this would have driven him crazy with desire, but now it was the same body he was in for the last day. He was just looking at it from a different angle and he felt nothing. It was more like being with his sister. Shelley put on panties and a bra. She stood, staring at the closet, trying to decide what to wear that today, and looking through her choices, she questioned Stu. "What did you look like before anyway?" He thought about his response a bit. "Gee, I've changed so many times this weekend I don't remember clearly anymore." Before Shelley had a chance to make her decision, her mother entered with all the bags from her purchases the day before. Shelley looked through the pile and tried on some of the clothes. She knew her mother's tastes in clothing and disagreed on the styles. A few of the items she refused to even try on, and after an argument with Barbara, they decided which to keep. The others Barbara insisted they return that day. That afternoon, when Stu walked outside, there was a second car on the driveway next to his. Barbara came out of the garage with an old child's seat and locked it in the middle of the back seat of the other car. He knew that had to be for him, so he climbed in the back and into the special seat. She maneuvered the harness over his head and buckled him in. Shelley drove them to the mall, where they returned to the same stores as the day before. Stu recognized some of the same saleswomen, but it was no longer his place to explain about the returns. Because of his little legs, it was taking Stu too long to walk between stores, so Barbara and Shelley took turns carrying him. Barbara made the comment that they definitely would need a stroller next time. Stu thought, what for? There won't be a next time, will there? They took a dinner break at the food court since they found a table with a high chair and put Stu in. He asked Barbara for a steak sandwich and a Coke. She returned with a slice of pizza which she cut into small pieces and a cup of milk with a straw. Stu began to protest, but from his mouth, it sounded more like whining. "Sounds like someone didn't have her nap today," Shelley commented. He gave her an icy glare and started eating. He found he got full very quickly and ate only half. When they got home, Barbara and Shelley were busy putting things away and Stu looked for something to do in his new room. It was dark outside and the room had no clock. He thought about looking for his watch when Barbara came in. She told him that it was past his bedtime and he needed to get ready. She picked him up and laid him down on the changing table again to remove all his clothes. She reached under the table and this time pulled out a diaper. She lifted his legs up and slid the diaper under him and began to fasten it. "I don't need that." "Yes, you do need that," she said, mimicking his little girl voice. "If you can get through a week and stay dry, then we'll go without it. Okay, baby?" He hated being called baby almost as much as he hated the thought of wearing diapers. Wait a minute, a week, he thought. No, he would be out of diapers and back to his old self by morning, he believed. She slipped a yellow, one-piece sleeper around him and snapped it up. He looked down and saw Winnie the Pooh characters on it. "Do all my clothes have animals on them?" "No, not all. But the ones you really like do. Now, come on, time for bed. Go give your sister a kiss and I'll tuck you in." As Stu laid in bed, he began talking out loud to himself. He was trying to make his voice sound more like an adult. He had to say the words very slowly and concentrate real hard to do it. He heard Barbara and Shelley talking and giggling inside. The two were planning something as he heard his name a few times. It had been a long day and he made a big yawn as he drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Shelley came into the bedroom. "Get up, sleepyhead, we have to get moving." "Where's Barbara?" Stu asked, still a little disoriented. "Mom's already gone to work." Stu began to cry and screamed that he had to change back now and ran inside looking for the medallion. He looked all over Barbara's room and even jumped on the bed to see on top of the dressers. He couldn't find it or any of his clothes anywhere. Shelley had come in and dragged him out of the bedroom by his arm. He had gotten really hysterical and was putting up a big fuss. In desperation, she put him over her knee and began spanking him. After a few well-placed whacks on his bottom, his screams turned to those of pain. She picked him up and held him tight in her arms until his cries turned to whimpers. He was shaking and the tears were still running down his cheeks as he started to calm down. After a good scolding by Shelley, he agreed to behave and listen to his big sister. Shelley ran a bath and removed his wet diaper. She put him in the tub and gently washed the little girl who had on a very sad face. Shelley carried Stu out of the bath and into his room. She dressed him in a lavender top with lace around the neck and short puffy sleeves. His underwear were very fancy with rows of lace ruffles. Over his head, she pulled down a denim jumper with flowers embroidered across the front. On his feet, she put socks and saddle shoes. Shelley combed his hair back and pulled it into a large ponytail with an elastic. She opened one of the drawers and removed a large bow which she fastened around the elastic. "Why I have to wear this?" Stu asked, pointing to his hair. "Because this is what the other little girls wear and the bow will keep the hair out of your face while you play today. Now, remember to keep your dress down or you'll be showing everyone your panties." Stu was lost in a daze again as he tried to get his words out right. "Shelley, I don't remember what I look like anymore." Shelley took him into the bathroom and placed him in front of the full-length mirror on the back of the door. "Here, Kelly, this is what you look like." It's not what Stu meant, but he stared so intently at his image and tried hard to see his old self in it as Shelley disappeared to get herself ready. While Shelley was busy, Stu decided to sneak inside and picked up the phone to call his office. He asked for Barbara's extension and after it rang many times, a voice he recognized as one of the secretaries came on. "Hello, I want to speak to Barbara, please." "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie, she's not here. She called in sick today," she said, trying to suppress a chuckle. "Let me speak to your mommy or daddy," she added. Stu hung up without responding as Shelley came inside with her purse. "Okay, I'm ready. Let's go." Stu looked up at Shelley. She was wearing baggy tan corduroy pants, a brown t-shirt and sneakers. Nothing at all like the outfit he was made to wear just the day before. "I don't think I'll be praying today," Stu told her, thinking back to what she said about the clothes she had him wear. Shelley just picked Stu up and put him in the car seat. As they drove away, she told him that he will be going to work with her. She worked at a daycare center with a nursery school and that he will spend the day there with her. On the way to school, Shelley drilled the first lesson into his head. "Listen, You're going to have to get used to the name Kelly from now on. That's what everyone is going to call you. I'm your big sister now and I know best." Where had he heard that before? It was almost like déjà vu. You're just a little girl now and you must behave like one. Any stories about being changed and you will be punished. Besides, no one is going to believe you anyway. Got it? I guess I'm Kelly now, Stu thought, as she agreed and sat quietly the rest of the way to her new school, saying to herself over and over, "I'm a little girl now, I'm a little girl now." Shelley took her sister out of her car seat and led her by the hand into the building. They entered a large room filled with children. Kelly was introduced to her teachers, Miss Susie and Miss Karen. As Shelley turned to leave, Kelly ran to her to see where she was going. Shelley told her that this room was for the 3- and 4-year-olds and that she worked upstairs with the infants. Kelly had her arms wrapped tightly around Shelley's leg until Susie came over to release them. Susie told Kelly that it was still free time and to go ahead and play with the others. As Kelly stood alone, she looked around the room and saw in one area a few boys playing with toy trucks. On her right, there were more boys building something with plastic tools. In the other corner was a girl playing alone with some building blocks, and on her left was a group of girls playing with some dolls. Her first instinct was to play with the boys and the tools. The boys there had no interest in her and told her to go away. She walked over to where the girls were and tried to fit in. She was ignored by most of them and only allowed to hold the dolls, which were broken or had no clothes. Feeling very sad and lonely, she went into the corner near the blocks. "Would you like to play blocks with me?" the other girl asked Kelly. "Okay. My name's Kelly. Mine's Katie." For a reason unknown to either girl, the two hit it off instantly. They felt they had so much in common and spent the entire day playing together. They sat jointly at lunchtime, put their cots next to each other at nap time, and ran around on the playground all afternoon together. By the end of the day, they were best of friends, and when Katie's mother came to pick her up, Katie asked her if Kelly could come to her birthday party tomorrow. Katie's mother said she would have to ask Kelly's mom just as Shelley was coming down the stairs. "Hi, I'm Shelley Connors, Kelly's sister." "Oh sure, I've seen you before. You work here, don't you?" "Yes, I'm with the little ones upstairs in the nursery. I'm Marcia, Katie's mom, and she is going to be 4 tomorrow. We would love to have Kelly come to her party. It will be right after school." "Yes, thank you, that would be lovely. I'm sure Kelly would really enjoy it." "Great. We'll see you tomorrow, Kelly. Bye." As they pulled up to the house, Kelly recognized another car in the driveway. It was hers, or at least hers when she was Stu. She ran inside looking for Barbara and bumped right into a man that looked like Stu. "Hi baby, how was nursery school today?" the man asked. She was stunned. "Who you? Don't you recognize me, baby? I'm Stuart Miller." "No you're not. That's me." "Oh Kelly, you're so cute. It's really mommy." Barbara explained to the very confused Kelly that she used the medallion to change into Stu that morning. Then she went to work to attend an important meeting. It was decided that Stu was to take a business trip to Pittsburgh and that he had to leave that evening. Kelly, who couldn't think about the situation well, said she can't go until morning and asked why she had to leave. Barbara said she handled everything. The travel authorization had been approved and she was just packing up some clothes. That's when Kelly noticed one of Stu's suitcases near the door. Kelly pleaded that she wanted to change back in the morning. Barbara explained that there would be 2 Stus and it wouldn't look right. Besides, you're going to Katie's birthday party tomorrow and you wouldn't want to upset her by not showing up. Shelley chimed in. Barbara was so happy that Kelly had made such good friends already. Kelly saw Barbara hand Shelley a large amount of cash as the 2 older women walked away to have a few words in private. Barbara explained that as Stu, she had gone to personnel and changed the information on some of his forms. She had left work at lunchtime to collect everything she needed at his condo, including his bank books and all his financial account information. Most of this, she left with Shelley and gave her a hug goodbye. On her way out, Barbara picked up Kelly and said she would be back in a couple of days and kissed her goodbye. The next morning, Kelly again was woken up by her big sister and had her wet diaper removed before being bathed. Kelly was told that she needed to be dressed for the party since Katie's mother will be picking her up directly from school. For this day, she wore a white, blue and yellow floral patterned dress with a lacy white petticoat underneath. White tights were pulled up over yellow panties and shiny black Mary Janes with a T-strap adorned her feet. Shelley turned Kelly around to tie a big bow in the back of her party dress. Her hair was then parted down the middle and gathered into 2 ponytails. Bright yellow hair ribbons were attached to each one, holding them high on her head. Her bangs were combed down and curled slightly inward just above her beautiful blue eyes. Kelly had a great time at school and also at the party. She was with other classmates and some girls she had never seen before, but they all got along well. When Shelley came after dinner to pick her up, Kelly told her all the fun she had and showed her the goodie bag full of toys and candy. When they got home, Kelly was very tired and went into bed early without a fuss. When the phone rang, she overheard Shelley talking with someone but couldn't tell who. She heard her name come up a few times, and when Shelley hung up, Kelly called out to her and asked what it was all about. Shelley said Mom was checking in to see how they were and that she would be home tomorrow. The next morning, Shelley again dressed Kelly and was excited to see that her diaper was dry. Wearing a fleece top and leggings in an animal print, Kelly hurried off to her now familiar morning routine and ride to nursery school. When she came home after school, she saw Barbara's car there in the driveway. She ran inside to greet Barbara and quickly answered all her questions about her day at school. "I want to change back now," Kelly demanded. "Oh baby, I'm so sorry, but you can't," Barbara apologized. She handed Kelly a newspaper and showed him the obituary section. Kelly had a hard time reading it and asked her what it said. She told her that there was a terrible car accident and Stu was killed late last Monday night on his way to Pittsburgh for a business trip. The article said that he fell asleep at the wheel in the wee hours of the morning and that the car left the road and rolled down a steep embankment. By daylight when the police arrived, Stu was found dead. But it's not true. I'm here. How could that be? No, you're Kelly Connors, a little girl, and you will forever stay that way. But I can use the medallion to change back. Barbara told Kelly that she no longer had the medallion. The body was thrown from the wreckage, and when she went down the hill in the dark, she couldn't find it. It must have been thrown off the body and into the nearby creek. Kelly ran into her bedroom and cried herself to sleep, sucking on her thumb for comfort. Shelley asked Barbara how she managed it all. She explained that after midnight on Monday, she used the medallion to turn herself back into Barbara's old body. Then, driving through New York City, she picked up an old drunk man off the street and offered him some alcohol and money. He was so drunk that he had passed out on the ride. She pulled the car over and put the medallion on him. Using the clothing she had on before, she changed him into Stu. After that, she changed the rest of his clothes with Stu's, propped him up in the driver's seat and sent him off the road. She caught the bus into the city the next day and spent the time shopping for some new outfits. Now that she had plenty of money to spend, she bought a very expensive dress for herself to wear at the wedding. She stayed one night in a hotel there and got a train back that morning. There was just enough time to get a taxi and show up for work that day and drive her own car home. The 2 women were very excited as Barbara led Shelley into her room to show her the clothes she had purchased. 5 weeks later, on a Saturday morning at the local church, a wedding was in progress. The mother of the bride looked at her daughter up in front of the altar reciting her vows. She was pleased at how beautiful she looked in her gown and how truly happy they all were. She no longer had to worry about paying off her large debits and the cost of the reception. Thanks to Stuart, whose life insurance policy paid out. It was triple the normal amount because he died while on a company business trip and she had been made his sole beneficiary. She had a rather large nest egg now when she included his retirement account and all his other major assets which came her way. Then, she glanced over to the little blonde girl on the side, looking like an angel in her white flower girl dress. Yes, she had come to terms with Shelley leaving her alone. She no longer had to sell the house now that she had her daughter Kelly to share her life with.